Let me ask you something real quick. Do you remember the first time you ever saw a signature guitar? And what was it actually about that signature guitar that made it stick out so much to you? You see, anytime I try and think of really impactful signature guitars, I have to go all the way back to my early days of playing and really wanting to learn the instrument. See, I was in college and I would rush back to my dorm room from class every single day, just itching to find the newest Stevie Ray or Clapton video that I could gawk at for the next couple of weeks, just hoping that one day I might be able to play even a few of their licks. I would watch them so carefully to mimic not just their licks, but the way they moved on stage, even the faces they made while playing. And eventually all of this curiosity would lead me to wanting to know what specifically made their guitars special. And it was so cool because they were all completely different. I mean, Clapton had this simple, elegant black Strat. Stevie Ray Vaughan had his relic beat up thing that was so iconic. And B.B. King, well, B.B. King had Lucille, which was basically prettier than any girl that I had seen on my campus in the past 4 years. But even amongst all of those, one of them that happened to stand out to me above basically all of the rest was Jimi Hendrix's signature Strat. And I think it was more than just the idea that this was the guitar that was being played by someone who most people consider the GOAT. I think it was also the form factor, the fact that it was upside down, and the way that it just popped out at you while you were watching him play it on screen. And whenever I would go to a guitar store and pick up any of the signatures, it would just feel that much more exciting because you're like, this is the Jimi Hendrix signature. And that sort of thing kept happening with all the different signatures that I hold in that super high esteem. The Tim Henson signature, the James Valentine signature. But the more I started looking into these guys' signature guitars, I also wanted to know, like, what amps are they actually playing? I mean, it makes sense, right? Sometimes I forget it, but the amp is just as much of an intentional choice as the guitar in getting some specific sound. But the more and more I really looked into these amps and some of the iconic tones that they had gotten over the years, depending on the players, I started to notice a slightly different trend than with some of the guitars. You see, basically every famous guitar player that I knew, all the way up from like the Eddie Van Halens to some relatively to the bigger guys, smaller content creators, most of them had signature guitars, and a lot of them, even the smaller ones, from like some very big companies. But then once it came to looking at the amp side of the equation, it was very, very few of my favorite artists that actually had signature amps. Like, everyone and their mother knows about B.B. King and Lucille, and Gibson and Epiphone will probably market that guitar till the day that that company dies. But I was thinking to myself, I've never in all my years heard them be like, oh, when are we gonna make the B.B. King signature amp? And that was with a lot of different players. I think that I realized that outside of like the Eddie Van Halens of the world and a couple other really high rollers, we most often associate multiple artists with a single amp, like a Bassman or like an AC30, instead of some like hypothetical, the Edge signature AC30. But as with a lot of things in life, there'll always be those few unique exceptions, and I happened to find one when I found one guitar in particular. You see, it all started when I discovered the PRS MCCARTY 594 SE about a year ago, and I thought to myself, this is it. They've finally done it. They've reached the pinnacle of the SE. This is the one that can compete with the S2s. They will never make a PRS SE better than this guitar right here. That was until I discovered the SE DGT, and it blew the MCCARTY 594 SE out of the water. Not that I didn't still love that guitar, but to me, this was like the pinnacle of what the SE line should be. This was the best SE guitar that PRS had ever made. I got nothing to say, but I truly do now think that this is the gold standard for the PRS SE line. And no pun intended. I was thinking to myself, bravo, David Grissom, you deserve my applause in this moment. Actually, let me do a little bit more research on this David Grissom guy. I listened to him a little bit back in the day, but what else is he doing? And the more research I did on him, I found that this wasn't his only collaboration with PRS. He'd actually put out a series of amps before, almost a decade ago, called the DG30. And that more recently, they had actually released a newer version of the amp called the DG15. Like, this man is one of the few who has a specific signature amp. So let's see what this thing can do. So this is the DGT15, and I think it's about time we mic it up and like really see what it can do. I've been going straight up back and forth between ribbon and dynamic whenever I mic up amps, so today we're going ribbon. So once I actually started playing through this amp, I was caught off guard by something interesting. And that interesting thing has a lot to do with the master volume. You see, the expectation pretty much every time I plug into a tube amp is that it's going to be so loud, especially once you get to the 15 watt realm. I was thinking I was just going to blow out the speakers, blow out the walls. My neighbors were going to come in and hate me. But once I actually plugged in my guitar, everything was shockingly quiet. I mean, for a 15 watt amp and the master volume to be over halfway up, and that's all the volume that I was getting, I was thinking to myself, that's very, very strange. But then once I started to look into this amp, I realized that the master volume on here can actually be taken out of the circuit, which is the exact way that David Grissom actually used it himself. You start to realize that with amps like this, the master volume knob kind of starts to work as an attenuator. And you start to remember that a lot of amps like the Pro Juniors and stuff like that, they really only have one volume knob to control all of the volume and the gain. So if I just had it with the volume, with the master out of the circuit, it would be pretty loud. Very much clipping the signal, and that's with the volume knob less than halfway up. So knowing that, I realized pretty quickly that there were only two alternatives if I was ever going to get this thing into the high gain territory that I know I've heard out of David Grissom's. The first of which was I was going to have to crank the gain quite a bit. Basically pretty much turn it all the way up and have the boost on. And I did get quite a bit more gain from that without having to worry about just using the volume knob and throwing out my speakers. But I pretty quickly realized that the only other active alternative would be to see how this thing does as a pedal platform. Now, once I had seen how it had done with the different levels of gain, I started to look more and more into the different ways that Grissom might use it himself. And I actually started to look into the reverb and how much he dials in, because I was dialing in a lot more than he was. And once I started really looking into the specifics behind the reverb, I noticed, interestingly enough, that it wasn't actually a digital reverb. This was an actual tube reverb coming out of the 212AX7. So at the end of the day, why does any of this even matter? I think it's a really cool thing that whenever I pick up a signature guitar, I really do start to, whether subconsciously or consciously, play a little bit different, tweak my tone knob, tweak my volume knob a little bit differently. And because there's so few signature amps that I see out there, I notice that it happens even more whenever I play through one. You just start to go through that different mental progression of like, what is David Grissom actually trying to go for here? And even specifically with something like this amp, they literally give you like his settings that I was not able to copy at all in any way because I would legitimately get evicted from my apartment. But you do start to think about those little things that really help you grow in your tone journey, where you're like, how does David Grissom use reverb? How does he use the tone cut? You start to think of the backstory to the little things behind why doesn't he like the master volume knob, and what different benefits would all of these different aspects have in his tone that would translate to yours. And I think that can apply to any amp ever made, not just like a David Grissom signature, but I do think it's cool to go into the why. Like, why did they make this thing? Why does David Grissom like the tones that he does, and how does he get them, and how can they make me better? Like I said, when I'm incorporating different things. But I guess at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what I think or what I learned. What matters is what you think. So please let me know. You like the DG15 amp? What's your favorite signature amp of all time? Let me know in the comments. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this video. I've been wanting to check out some different PRS amps for a while. The only other one I've ever had is the Archon 50, which is very, very different from this guy right here. So it was cool to see the other side of like what a PRS has going amp-wise. If you want to know anything more about the DG15, I got it from the homies at PRS, who are the sponsors of this video. Thank you to them. The links are in the description. Make sure to check it out. It's one of the best ways to support the channel if that's something you want to do. Or if you're just curious about any of the other guitars or gear I used in this video, make sure to check out those links. Like and subscribe if you had a good time. And most importantly, like most important of all, have a fantastic night.